So, though there are many things about media that are not new to the current age, the medium through which most media is consumed has greatly changed over the past 10 to 20 years. The rise of cable television greatly expanded the number of outlets that were available for news and entertainment. It created more options for people who wanted to seek out either specific kinds of news or perhaps people that didn't want news at all. Perhaps they wanted some other type of political content, not necessarily news, but commentary, opinion, maybe even political entertainment. And internet based sources have significantly expanded over the past 10 years. So you should think to yourself, what are the methods by which you consume your media? And chances are it has to do with many factors regarding who you are, your age, your political leanings, perhaps, whether or not you are engaged in politics at all. So, statistically, believe it or not, television is actually the primary source of most political news. And as you can see here, I have a breakdown of where people do tend to get their news. Fox News, to this day, is actually still the highest rated cable television news network in the country, followed by CNN and then a number of other news programs. Internet is also a big source of news for a lot of people. As you can see here, there are people that get news from just online sources, nondescript, non-specific, and then quite as followed, though not by not by a close second, but 2% in this survey, by people who get their news from Facebook, Twitter, social media. Now, of course, there are folks who will post or get news from links posted on social media that go to more legitimate websites like news websites, CNN Online, ABC Online, etc. And there's you could spin that either way. Print, believe it or not, a lot of people do still get their news from print media, newspapers. Uh, New York Times is still the highest subscribed paper in the country. And then, believe it or not, radio, NPR, is still present, coming in at a whopping 6%. And then word of mouth is actually still a method by which a lot of people claim to get their news. If you're a young person, believe it or not, chances are you still get a lot of your news from TV, 18 to 29. But whenever you start looking at other types of media, print, radio, internet, it does show some skewed effects as far as age. Younger people tend to use the internet more so than older people. That is pretty intuitive. Whereas older people do tend to still get their media from and news from print and radio. So, what have been some of the effects of the proliferation of all these different news outlets? There are more sources to get news now than there ever have been before. Now, believe it or not, because of this, we actually lived in the most informed age. People are more informed now than they ever have been when it comes to politics and current affairs. Now, whether or not their knowledge is useful, applicable, or even true is a whole other matter. But the point is, we as a people, quote unquote, are more informed on political matters than than at any point in history, largely because media is much more easily accessed now. But it's also had this other effect in which it allows people to seek out specific types of news that they want. So this chart here actually shows that there was already sort of a partisan skew in terms of where people were getting their news just with TV cable news. Fox News tends to primarily attract Republicans. CNN, there's slightly less of a skew, but very few Republicans watch CNN or at least name CNN as one of their main news sources. Uh, about just under half of Democrats and uh, quite a few independents get CNN as their, or list CNN as their primary news source. And that has only been exacerbated with the advent of online news sites such as Breitbart, Huffington Post, the numerous blog sites and independent journals that post online. You could potentially zero in on specific news sources without ever having to so much as glance at a competing news site. This is often called stratimentation, and this refers to an ideological fragmentation of news outlets and the stratification of news audiences. When people say that we are living in different informational universes, this is a big reason why. There are people that will read their specific news outlets thinking that um, the country is doing fairly well, that the economy is doing well, and then that there are other people, and there are other people who will read their news outlets and think that things are not so good, that things are going badly, sometimes depending on nothing more than who's in power. And this is said to contribute to increased polarization. People seem to prefer this bias. I mean, there are objective news sources available, but Fox News, for example, is one news network that is pretty assertive in presenting its news with a certain bent, and mostly to their own admission, and it is one of the highest, if not the highest, cable news channels in the country. And as almost to prove my point, whenever Trump was elected, MSNBC, or NBC News, with a known moderate to leftist slant, sometimes on some weeks actually beat Fox News in the ratings. Why? Because people who were Clinton supporters might have been seeking solace in a news network where things were presented with a sympathetic point of view. And in terms of why these companies present bias, well, it's because niche marketing is sort of the trend right now, and that includes media. We all see targeted ads on our social media accounts, even in our emails. And when you have a built-in audience, that is pretty tempting in terms of why media outlets might target niche audiences, because you have an audience that is ready-made for your content.